I was grateful that every life involved had been spared. A death at the center would have weighed heavily on my mind for some time. But when I encountered the results of the children's medical examinations, I wished that a death had occurred in place of the unfathomable.
It's safe to say that we live in quite a polarizing time. The general public has essentially lost their trust with their government and anybody in a position of power. It's not surprising when you can look outside your window and see a hell world being created, and nothing is being done to stop it. In some cases, the powerful are complicit. Monuments we once saw as crowning achievements of national pride have slowly been revealed to be just lies. The monuments themselves have their own dark history. So it comes as no surprise that a series like ALEXKANSAS' Monument Mythos has gained so much traction this year. It explores an alternate universe timeline where these very monuments have disturbing, even supernatural histories behind them. Today we look at the short film series Monument Mythos. So I've got a confession to make. I'm not a big fan of analog horror. I've tried getting into some of the big ones, but it's just not for me. And I never understood why until I watched Monument Mythos. You see, one of my least favorite horror cliches is the jump scare. You know, get a creepy image, get some loud music, and boom, you have scared the audience. If I'm being honest, it's also a pervasive issue in the analog horror genre. Sure, it works the first time, but it loses its impact very quickly. Now, don't get me wrong, these series are made by very talented people, and they have their fans for a reason, but their presentation was just not for me. All that said, Monument Mythos compelled me not just with its interesting story, but also with its unique filmmaking style. This series was created by ALEXKANSAS. He's been in the filmmaking game for quite some time, and takes inspiration from some of the greatest artists like Ron Rake, Matisse Daubier, and even David Cronenberg. One of the first short films on his channel, Mr. Manticorn, actually won him an award at a high school film festival. So it was only a matter of time before his work really took off. Now, obviously I think the best way to experience this series is by watching the videos on your own, but first I want to try something that I don't see many people do when covering this type of genre. And that's explain why I think this series is so good. I won't be spoiling any of the overarching story, but I will be spoiling the twist of a few videos. Namely these, so if you want to check them out now, go ahead. As you'll come to see, I think these films are great regardless of if you know the quote-unquote twist or not. As mentioned before, this series doesn't really throw any disturbing imagery in your face. Instead, it presents itself as more of a documentary using text, interviews, infographics, and archival footage. It makes for a good immersive experience. I feel like I'm watching a history segment on an old TV channel. Of course, the series has its fair share of creepy images, but I feel like the horror comes from the concepts presented rather than anything visual. Let's take a look at a video like the Lincoln Looker. This video documents a very disturbing presidential tradition. We start off with an interview of a woman named Maya Arnoldson, who is mistakenly forced to be a Lincoln Looker. She describes the experience as being stuck in a cold metal suit, only being able to look through two small holes. Soon the government realizes she's the wrong person and lets her go. President Reagan himself apologizes to her. From memory, Maya is able to draw this mask she wore. It sounds like an outlandish tale, but the story is essentially confirmed through an interview with former senior advisor Leonard Moreland.
There's always that someone that we dislike more than everyone else. Not usually famous or important, but they've done something that's affected us personally. Often you're the only person who remembers this act. And I've been that bad, but memory hurts. Everyone experiences this, and the president is no exception. except he can do something about it. Every president can choose one person to be a Lincoln looker. After the alibi is fabricated, the person is abducted from their home, and they stay a Lincoln looker for as long as the president sits in office. Nobody can question his decision, and there's no trial. You might be surprised, but it's nothing new. It's been a tradition. Lincoln lookers have been around for a very long time.
Despite these testimonials, the White House still goes out of their way to disprove these claims. They take down Lincoln portraits to show that nothing is behind these walls. However, it's here where a man named Howard Melrose drops a bombshell of information. He describes a day where he visits the Lincoln Memorial and started hearing scratching coming from the statue. He informs a security guard who tells him it must be an animal. Soon, a blind girl hears a noise too. Hearing it closely, it starts to make her cry, and eventually she tries to break whatever is in there free. This prompts the guard to escort everyone off the premise. Before leaving, Howard is able to capture this video. Okay, what the hell did we just watch? Well, cutting it down to just its concepts, this video is about the abuse of power by one of the most powerful people in the country. What makes this even eerier is that it's all kind of an open secret. Like, there's a pretty good amount of evidence saying that something is going on at the Lincoln Memorial, but the White House still denies it. But, I mean, open secrets are the government's forte. I'll get into the Lincoln Monster in a sec, but I think this is where the true horror of the series comes from. These videos all document the government and their dealings with supernatural phenomena behind closed doors. There's plenty of evidence to suggest what they're doing is morally reprehensible, but all we can do is watch. And yeah, this creature at the end could be considered a jump scare, but as you'll see, these creature reveals are used sparingly and thus are more impactful. Also, the historical context adds layers of horror to them. Constructing a good story requires good writing, and it's another aspect about this series I want to praise. I think the best example of this can be seen in the video Rockefeller Tree Tragedy. Not to spoil too much of its plot, but it documents a supernatural event involving a tree told from the perspective of John D. Rockefeller and a young girl named Virginia. These two stories fill in the gaps for one another. It's impressive to see both a mature and childish writing style pulled off so effectively in the same video. On top of that is the inclusion of great voice acting for both books, an important aspect to pulling this type of storytelling off. Something this series is well known for is its soundtrack, namely its sampling of old songs from the 1930s and 40s. One of the most famous pieces comes from the video Washington Wormhole and goes like this. These songs are effective at creating both a nostalgic and unnerving tone. I assume none of us grew up in the 40s, but somehow songs from this time period tend to give off an aura of familiarity. However, the songs in this series loop back on the same short segment, keeping us in this familiar but different mindset. I truly believe the songs are meant to be reflective of alternate history as a concept. It's history presented in a familiar but different way. I say all of this to emphasize that there is so much purpose behind every filmmaking aspect here. From the integration of archival video, to voice acting, to music and its creative writing. It's easy to immerse yourself in this world that's being created here. I guess now it's time to document all we know about this alternate universe so far, so obvious spoiler warning going forward. Since this series is about history, I'm going to present this as a linear timeline of events. Just like real history, early events are given more context as we move forward in time and receive new information, which means I'll be jumping back and forth quite a bit. So pay attention. Our important history starts on an unconfirmed date with the discovery of Giza glass. The discovery was made by the Bedouin tribes, placing us around 6000 BCE. The tribes realized that lightning strikes during certain constellations produced this glass when it hit the sand. This glass would be used in black market trades between tribes. This takes us over to Egypt, where pharaohs appoint guardians to chop down certain trees with Giza glass blades. These trees will be referred to as special trees throughout history because of their strange properties. For instance, the trees in Egypt aren't just growing, but they also can't be cut down. Instead, the guardians are chopping at the trees in an effort to hurt them, forcing them to heal themselves and thus stunting their growth. By prolonging their growth, the Egyptians had enough time to build towers to contain these special trees. In 1840, the first photograph of a special tree is taken by an unknown person. It's a tall tree with no branches and is very crooked. Seeing it now, you start to understand why the Egyptians felt the need to contain it. In 1848, similar construction is done on this tree. A tower of some kind is built around it. While that story plays out in the background, we're gonna go to 1858. American sculptor Thomas Crawford is hired to sculpt the Statue of Freedom. During this time, Crawford heard rumors of a special material called Giza glass. Believing it would work well for Freedom's blade, he goes to Egypt to get some. While working, he accidentally cuts a small piece of his finger off. However, the cut produced no pain, and he could still move his detached finger. Several weeks pass and the sculpture is still not sent. In fact, Crawford himself goes silent. Detective Alfonso Safino is sent to investigate and learns that Crawford passed away. However, if we take a look at this from the perspective of Crawford's wife and daughter, we discover something a lot more disturbing. According to Nina's diary, on April 10th, her father went to work at his studio as he normally did. By April 13th, he had not come back. Now, this was something Crawford did quite often, staying at his studio for long periods of time, but for some reason, this incident worried his wife Louisa immensely. She goes to his studio to find out what's wrong. When she returns, she goes straight to her room and does not leave. The next day, Zafino comes by to ask about Crawford, and then enters Louisa's room. Eventually, more men show up, sending her into hysterics. She yells the phrase, "She has his eyes." Let's dig a little deeper and look at this from the perspective of Louisa. According to an interview, Louisa reveals that Crawford not only cut off his finger, but eventually cut off his own hand on purpose. Cutting himself with the Giza glass seemed to become an obsession, which unsurprisingly worried Louisa. When he didn't return, she feared the worst and traveled to his studio. There, she discovered the statue filled with her husband's body parts, his organs, his bones, and most shocking of all, his eyes. Zafino tries to tell her this was the work of a serial killer, but she's not convinced and continues screaming. This event scares Nina enough to run away from home. Back to Nina, she remembers her father telling her how the statue will be shipped in boxes. She locates the ship and secretly enters one of the boxes containing the statue's body parts. She reports that the boxes are closed shut using rope, but on April 21st, the ropes are cut and she hears wood being broken. She takes this time to find some food, but also finds the head of the statue. It looks at her with her father's eyes. According to the captain's logs, the crew finds 2 large holes in the storage room, as well as the boxes being untied. On April 24th, Nina is seen by one of the crew members, and she quickly hides in one of the boxes. She decides to stay here and not write anything until she gets to land. On April 29th, the ship arrives at Gibraltar. The captain reports that there were many holes in the storage room, and when they opened the crates for customs, they were all empty. On the same day, Commissioner H. Morgan investigates reports of some sort of force cutting down trees at a place called The Rock. They climb up the rock, following the path of freshly cut trees. Nina's diary reveals that on this day, the statue took her and ran through the jungle, cutting down several trees. They fall down a hole into a deep cave, where the statue begins sharpening its sword for hours. The statue never takes its eyes off of Nina. The commissioner and his men eventually find a hole leading into a cave. What they find is best told by the commissioner himself.
In the middle of the location stood a plaster model of a tall Greco-Roman statue of a woman. Surrounding this sculpture were the splayed remains of an individual, flattened like a set of clothes. A hollowed-out torso was stretched a quarter of the way up the statue, the sight of which compelled a few of the officers to exit the cavern. The human remains were collected and sent to the morgue, while the sculpture was cleaned and lifted out.
The following information is told to us by a poem written by Philip Reed. He documents that the Statue of Freedom did not arrive as a statue, but as a real person. A tall soldier in chains and imprisoned. He's told the actual statue is inside her, and he is tasked with getting her out. Reluctantly, he succeeds.
They tell me I have to take it out of her. So hook, rope, peel, and pull. When it was done, freedom stood motionless. Freedom stood still. I see the final bronze woman, and I feel as if, maybe even hope, she's only dormant now, and will awaken again.
The Freedom Saga is one of my favorites of the series. It's a genuinely disturbing story, made even more interesting through its presentation. Information unfolds from different sources, different perspectives, just like a real event in history would. The Freedom story doesn't end here, but for now, the statue will remain dormant. During the years of the Civil War, construction on the tower surrounding the American Special Tree halts. It's not a really noteworthy period until you learn that prisoners of war are being taken to this tower. The fate of these prisoners has not been disclosed. The 1870s marked the official discovery of Giza glass by Flinders Petrie. In the 1880s, Petrie, along with the British government, secured collection of Giza glass in Egypt. However, while collecting, Petrie slips on an upright plane of glass and is decapitated. To the surprise of everyone, Petrie is still alive and can even speak a few simple words. Relief quickly becomes concern when it appears that his head begins to swell and discolor. The fate of Flinders Petrie is unknown. In 1888, the tower surrounding the special tree is named the Washington Monument. In 1889, Frederic Auguste Bartholdi is interviewed for his work on designing the Statue of Liberty. He explains that creating the pedestal was the hardest part of the process, since the Americans kept asking for it to be bigger.
Nous avons accepté l'échappement. Nous avons reçu des exigences de taille variable pour le piédestal. Après 4 ans de demander de modification de la taille du piédestal ont cessé. Les gens se demandent pourquoi le piédestal est tellement plus grand que le rang. Tout ce que je veux dire, c'est demander aux Américains.
In 1891, Petrie's collection of Giza glass finally arrives in England. Although due to poor handling, the glass arrives broken. The government decides to share the shards with American ambassadors as a sign of diplomacy. So one thing you should know about this alternate timeline is that the president during this time is not Benjamin Harris, but instead, it's John D. Rockefeller. As president, he decides to confiscate the shards from the ambassadors. Vaguely aware of their special property, he uses the glass to create blades and gives them to Greco-Egyptian swordsmen. These swordsmen are sent to guard the Grand Canyon. Any trespassers are immediately maimed, but they're also provided a special substance that halts the adverse side effects of being cut by Giza glass. Unfortunately, the substance becomes less effective over time. Older victims are promised housing in the Grand Canyon under the condition that they lure dangerous criminals wanted by the government to the area. In 1910, the Washington Monument becomes a popular tourist attraction. One of the aspects advertised is the music within the walls. Between the years of 1910 and 1971, 20 tourists disappear while visiting the monument. Alright, from here on out, things are about to get kinda crazy, so prepare yourself. So in August of 2021, a series of Rockefeller tapes is uploaded to YouTube. Part 7 of these tapes consist of Rockefeller detailing the crimes he committed during the time period of World War I. During his Giza Guardian experiment in the Grand Canyon, Rockefeller learned that victims who were decapitated by the glass turned into large floating heads. He calls them crowns and sees them as a chance to get out of an economic collapse.
Once I had been debriefed of the situation in the Grand Canyon, the overpopulation of crowns, I realized that I was also hearing the beginnings of a solution to the impending economic collapse. That solution being slavery. I can imagine your reluctance to read on, and I entirely understand. Rest assured, I believe that all citizens should be unconditionally promised the very freedoms that our country established at its founding: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. However, crowns are not men or women, nor are they animals. They are merely the decayed shells of ignoble criminals. They do not qualify for the same freedoms exercised by ordinary civilians. Once they were conditioned and bound together, the crowns became the perfect workforce. They did not rebel, for they could not speak. They could not leave, for they were chained. And best of all, the crowns were incapable of forming unions.
These crowns would be sold as slaves to the Germans, who paid a large price for them. Unfortunately, using crown labor, the Germans created airships which they used to bomb American and European soldiers during the war. The Germans referred to these airships as Rockefellers. Rockefeller's 2 terms ended before he could do anything about the airships. President Hughes would be tasked with eliminating them discreetly. This led to the creation of Operation Pyramid Plasma. It involved the creation of an anti-airship heat ray manned by 17 soldiers. Unfortunately, upon using this heat ray, all 17 men divided into microscopic parts. The remains of these men are left to wander the desert. This next event is told from the perspective of both Rockefeller in his book A Recollection of a Tragedy, and a young girl named Virginia Arnoldson in her book Virginia in Wonderland. In December of 1990, the construction of Rockefeller Center was underway. Rockefeller himself was compelled to place a hand-picked tree at the center every Christmas. According to Virginia's book, Rockefeller stumbled across a special tree with no branches and chose it as the tree for the center. However, it could not be cut down normally or even blown up. Rockefeller hired a team of his best grave diggers to try and dig the tree up, which they informed would take them 3 years. And so this special tree would be unveiled in 1934. December of that year rolls around and the tree is placed at the center. The young girl Virginia has plans to place her star at the top of the tree when no one is looking. She gathers some friends and they all help her climb to the top. As soon as she places the star, the tree begins to move.
Just then, there was a strange sound. The tree began to shake. Its glued branches fell off all at once, and the entire tree slowly bent backwards. Soon, the very top of it touched the ground, forming a perfect arc. It was like a very strange rainbow. My heart sank as I saw my star gently slide to the ground from the tree's top. Bolts of lightning then shot out from inside the arc of the tree, producing thunderous booms. The lightning scared my friends and me. We all tumbled to the ground and ran in all directions, but the lightning caught up to us. I was blinded by a great white light. I remember when my eyes adjusted, I was in a field of special trees, and I saw...
Virginia and her friends are sent to the hospital, and the tree disappears. While at the hospital, the kids are visited by their parents. However, these people are similar, but different to how she remembered them. Virginia does not believe these people are her parents, and the parents don't believe Virginia is their daughter. The same thing happens to her friends. Things get worse when Rockefeller visits the kids and asks them a series of easy history questions, which they all get wrong. In fact, they don't recognize Rockefeller as a former president. Instead, they know him as a wealthy businessman.
But of all the discrepancies, the most bizarre was their faulty recollections of notable persons and events. For instance, each of the affected children claimed that I had become the wealthiest man in America through an oil monopoly. It is common knowledge that I did indeed work at an oil refinery in my youth, but to entirely deny my 2 terms as president and insist instead that I had always been a mere philanthropist struck me as being particularly odd. The families were agonized by the children's behavior. Some continue to search for their real children. I support their endeavors, for I do not believe that the children's afflictions were the result of hysteria.
The worst part of the night is when the kids are all given x-rays. From her room, Virginia can hear the nurses repeat in worried tones, "It's all backwards." This event becomes known as the Rockefeller tragedy. Sometime later, Rockefeller is asked about the disappearing tree. In 1937, 19 years after Operation Pyramid Plasma, the microscopic soldiers fuse together to become one person. This person returns back to the US and launches a counterattack. On May 23rd of the same year, Rockefeller enters a bunker underneath 30 Rockefeller Plaza and is never seen again. Investigators reveal that the door of one of the bunkers was melted using a heat ray. Evidence suggests that Rockefeller was abducted. Only 2 photos exist of a potential suspect. In 1949, the Statue of Liberty undergoes extensive renovations. This includes implementing an engine and waste storage room. In this timeline, Alcatraz is not just a prison, but a large cell, one that multiplies. It's projected to consume part of the US in the coming decades. As a result, in 1950, the government decides to blast it with radiation therapy, to no avail. It continues to multiply in the coming decades. In 1954, immigrants report a foul odor coming from Ellis Island. An interview with Eleonora Bramante reveals that each night, officials would take lines of people over to the statue. The following morning, the odor would be at its worst. She describes it as a slaughterhouse. The immigration station would close that November. In 1960, the Maze Machines Company is formed by Rob Carreers and Rob Watraba. The company specializes in creating computers and other machines. Between the years of 1960 and 1971, 13 manufacturing plants are built across the US. In 1967, James Dean announces his run to become president. He does this in a strange way. For a whole week, the news hyped up a special announcement of grave importance. Over 60 million Americans tune in to just watch this one 15-second clip.
What are we waiting for? Let's bring them back home.
On November 1st of 1968, an organization known as the Anti-Dean Association hijacks radio channels and cuts power lines in the southeast US, an effort to stop people from voting for Dean. This compelled Dean to help fix power lines himself, boosting his already favorable image with the public. 4 days later, James Dean is elected president. 1969 is what I consider to be a shady year. On April 20th, during one of Dean's TV speeches, the Anti-Dean Association, ADA for short, cuts the audio. This stunt backfires as now people see Dean as confident even in the face of a hijack like this. On May 13th, an event known as Dean Disaster happens. The ADA turns on all the sirens in the US at max volume. This destroys the eardrums of many citizens, including James Dean, who helped shut off the sirens. This event leaves millions deaf and prompts Dean to label the ADA as a terrorist group. He encourages everyone to find members of the ADA and bring them to authorities, which is exactly what happens.
Over the next week, hundreds of thousands of anti-Deaners would be apprehended and sent to correctional facilities around the United States. These facilities, meant for the anti-American, were aptly located near or at national monuments in order to symbolize a return to American virtues. Most would stay for merely a few weeks before being released again. Friends and family of rehabilitated anti-Deaners frequently claimed that they would have improved personalities, no recollection of their past criminal activities, and even slightly altered physical appearances.
On May 22nd, the Mays Machine Company introduces new hearing implants, suspiciously quickly. Dean is the first person to have an implant inserted. The next day, Dean establishes the Department of Technology, allocating billions of dollars toward technological advancements. By May 20th, the surgeries from these hearing implants become nationwide for those affected. By June 6th, the use of surgical androids is approved. In the description of this video, it's revealed that regular deaf people were given the option to not get implants, out of respect. However, social pressure compelled them to accept treatment. Those who didn't were ostracized and even forced to flee the country. As a result, the US becomes the first nation to eradicate deafness. 1969 also marks the year that the Giza Guardian Project, the project that placed swordsmen in the Grand Canyon, ends. Or so we're told. Apparently, people still report seeing warriors in the Grand Canyon, but it goes unconfirmed for now. In 1970, Mays creates the first personal video camera and home computer. 1971 is the last year someone goes missing at the Washington Monument. In 1972, Mays collaborates with the Department of Defense in an effort to control total forces of mass destruction, TFMDs for short. This project is called Project Horned Serpent. The known TFMDs for now are the pyramids and the special trees, although according to former advisor Leonard Moreland, climate change and mankind are eventually classified as TFMDs under the Dean administration. In the same year, a classified film titled Washington Standard Operation is leaked to the news. The film details how people are sacrificed at a monument, or more specifically, the tree within. On December 24th of 1976, George Washington is found in the Delaware River by two men. Washington is then taken to the Delaware Hospital. 3 days later, the Delaware River Journal reports on the story where one of the men, Ralph Grasserman, gives his theory on the man he found.
Grossman believes that the man he dug out from the ice is the true George Washington, and that the former president had become gravely ill while crossing the Delaware River. Grossman claims that the imminent death of Washington could have been devastating to the war effort, so his condition was likely kept secret by having a double acting as the president until 1797. When asked for an explanation to why the body had been found so far from the site of the battle, Grossman replied, "He either drifted away or his men purposely planted it far away so that no one could find it."
The next day, the Delaware River Journal is shut down by federal authorities. On January 6 of 1977, the ADA storms the U.S. Capitol and, in the process, shoots down the Statue of Freedom. This footage is also released. Over 150 people died during this incident. The government claims it was due to the fall itself. Later that year, the statue is brought to the Grand Canyon. This is reported on by the New Delaware Journal. Following this story is the release of classified file STFR 4.3099 by journalist Howard Melrose. Melrose is exiled to Egypt following its release. In 1980, Maze is attacked. We see the attack depicted in this image. Hundreds of trees sprouting out of the company. Following this attack, all personal computers are recalled as they may pose a risk to American lives. In 1981, Maya Arnoldson is forced to be a Lincoln Looker for 2 weeks. Around the same time, Melrose releases this footage. August of 1985 marks the first sighting of what people call the Liberty Lurker. In 1990, the last personal computer by Maze is shut down. In 2000, Maze releases Maze Movie Maker. That same year, the Washington Monument is vandalized with this message: "The infection is nigh. The music of Washington will end." On August 7th of 2003, Mount Rushmore is vandalized with this message: "The US government can fund mass murder if it's labeled as a national monument. Every day, executions occur in over 2,600 American landmarks. The blood of liberty will be avenged. The souls of Lincoln will be freed." A week later, August 14th, another message is seen: "I will introduce infection next week. Monday through Sunday, 10:12 to 10:13 p.m. Watch symptoms." On August 17th of 2003, Air Force One makes an unannounced trip across the U.S. Civilians report that it drops packages on various national monuments. This includes Rushmore, Alcatraz, and the Statue of Liberty. Notably, the statue is missing in this image. It's revealed that this flight was unauthorized and unmanned according to the government. Only this footage exists of a supposed pilot. On August 18th, patrols are sent to Mount Rushmore to tape any anomalies. Each night, something strange occurs. The final night of the week is the most shocking. Later that year, this happens at the Washington Monument. The 19 Washington absentees are found unconscious at the base of the monument. In the same year, the Alcatraz attack begins. In 2004, Maya Arnoldson's body is found at the Grand Canyon. Her head is missing. A tape is also found containing audio of her final moments.
No. No, not now. I'm leaving now. I won't bother you.
In 2009, a woman named Lauren Arnoldson visits the Grand Canyon with her father, Nathaniel Arnoldson. It's a normal vacation for the most part, until Lauren captures footage of a floating head. When asked why they went to the Grand Canyon, Nathaniel replies that he is looking for his sister. We're then shown a series of images of bodies with no heads. They seem to be near the head of the trail. In 2020, Alcatraz extends to West Texas. On March 23rd of 2021, the Ever Given is lodged in the Suez Canal. On April 6th, President Clinton decides to use nuclear power to move the container ship. On April 10th, the nuclear strike is launched. However, this awakens or creates a monster crab that walks away with the ship. The UN decides not to destroy the crab, since that would place the items on the ship at risk. On April 16th, the Suez Canal crab crashes into the Cairo Tower. Over 1,000 people die. Rescue efforts take place over the following days. On April 17th, news of the disaster spreads, leading Americans to book over 12,000 flights to Cairo in order to reap the rewards of the fallen ship. On April 19th, the Americans reach the site of disaster. Chaos ensues as people fight over the luxury goods. The crab, who is presumed to be dead, has its leg twitch, causing everyone to flee in panic. The chaos of the whole event leads to the death of over 11,000 people. On April 20th, journalist Howard Melrose visits the disaster zone. There he finds people worshipping the crab as a god. In May of 2021, Nathaniel Arnoldson passes away. This event parallels the real-life death of Alex's father and is seen more as a respectful tribute. On July 4th of 2021, a monument known as the Starry Sphinx is caught on camera flying from Mars to Egypt. We also catch a glimpse of the constellation that produces Giza glass. The Sphinx is said to be made of false children, which produces light upon landing. After the mothership lands in Egypt, the pyramids begin to rise. The Sphinx then distracts people as the mothership leaves. And that is the Monument Mythos timeline so far. The story can be quite convoluted, so I'll give you the SparkNotes analysis as a recap. Keep in mind this is the interpretation of one person, so other Monument Mythos historians feel free to post your own comments down below. Special trees are probably the most important thing of this series. Their origin is unknown, but we know they're in Egypt and America. They can't be cut down by normal means, so people opt to create towers around them with mixed results. The tree in the Washington Monument uses music to lure people through a secret entrance, where they make them fall from a great height. The trees in the pyramids begin to grow once the Starry Sphinx makes it to Earth, revealing themselves to be towers. However, there is evidence that suggests an unknown party can plant them. The Air Force One Angel was shown to plant these trees on Mount Rushmore, the Statue of Liberty, and possibly Alcatraz. They might also be aware of what they're doing. As mentioned before, the Washington tree used music to lure people, and another tree did the same to Rockefeller. The tree in that story also showed off the ability to teleport and turn into a human-like being. Debatably, the attack on Maze was a deliberate action by the trees. Other theories suggest that the electricity from the facility drew them in, or that a third party planted them just like the Air Force One Angel. Perhaps the strangest property of the trees is that they are links between universes. This happened to Virginia when she tried to place a star on top of the tree. Briefly, she woke up in this black void before waking up in a new timeline. Finally, the lightning produced by the trees creates Giza glass, which brings us to the next topic. Giza glass's most important property is that it can turn people into crowns when they cut off someone's head. Other body parts that are cut off with the glass are still usable. This became an obsession for Thomas Crawford when he was using the glass for the Freedom Statue's sword. Eventually, he put his own body parts in the statue, giving it a life of its own. Crowns produced by the glass were used as slave labor during the Rockefeller administration. Germans used American crowns to create airships that killed hundreds of American and European soldiers. Rockefeller himself has some interesting history to him. Instead of becoming an oil tycoon, he became the president of the US. He's also one of the only people who's been able to uplift a special tree, although it did accidentally create a portal between universes. His crime of using slave labor would ultimately catch up to him when the Germans used them for airship creation. To save face, Operation Pyramid Plasma was executed, which destroyed the ships discreetly, but would also cause the disintegration of 17 soldiers. These soldiers formed into one and either abducted or killed Rockefeller years later. Their whereabouts are unknown. Another president of interest is James Dean, who in this universe seems to be a crowd favorite. He's young and charming and has a good solution for everything, and yet there's this whole group so aggressively against him. Now, I'm not claiming he's satanic just yet, but he's quite a shady person when you look into him closely. For instance, the Dean disaster happened quite close to his collaboration with the Maze Machine Company, who created perfect hearing devices for those affected mere days later. If that wasn't shady enough, it's almost entirely confirmed that he uses the universe-hopping ability of the trees. After the Dean disaster, he arrested ADA members and had them sent to certain monuments, like the Washington Monument. These people came back with happier personalities and even had slight differences in appearance. During his administration, Melrose leaked classified files that showed the Freedom Statue executing different targets, including Maya Arnoldson. The public may be blinded by his nice charms, but undeniably he's a different beast behind scenes. The Arnoldson family begins with Virginia, who was teleported to the Monument Mythos timeline around Christmas. She had 2 children, Maya and Nathaniel Arnoldson. Nathaniel then had a daughter named Lauren, who is the person behind a few videos like Canyon Crown and Fallen Father. Nathaniel and Maya are behind videos like The Maze Movie Maker. Maya Arnoldson is also the unfortunate victim of the Liberty Lurker and the Freedom Faller. I'll talk about her a little later. There's actually quite a bit of history behind Virginia revealed in the most recent video, Washington Wonderland. I did not include it here because 1, I'm lazy, and 2, because I think it's a great incentive to go watch the series after this video. It adds a lot of context to her plight after the events of the tragedy. Back to the monuments, the Statue of Freedom is my favorite creature in this series. Her backstory is so tragic and well told. There isn't much to add that you can't already pick up on the timeline. She's a statue that was given life through body parts cut by Giza glass. This life was ripped to her when she was shipped to the US. She laid dormant for years until someone shot her down, at which point she went on a rampage, tearing people apart to wear as skin. She's then used by the government to execute their enemies, and presumably she's still at it. Even if she's not real, I can't help but feel bad for her. She didn't ask to exist, and yet was thrust into this chaotic world where it tried to kill her, but now simply uses her. Like Dean, the Maze Machine Company is kind of shady. It was founded by Rob Careers, get it? And it produces personal computers. Even in 2021, it still makes technology like the in-universe Twitter. They truly are monsters for that one. Although speaking about real monsters, let's take a look at where the company placed their factories. It makes a zigzag line. Now let's take a look at the diagram for the Horned Serpent project. It's the same line. And taking a look at the video released by the Arnoldsons, one of the factories was actually the inside of a monster. I think we can conclude that this monster is actually the serpent. Keep in mind, President Dean collaborates with this company frequently. So why is a serpent here? Well, that remains to be solved. In fact, there are quite a few unsolved parts in this series. Like the Statue of Liberty has some sort of monster in it. Same goes for Lincoln, and Alcatraz itself is some sort of monster. The Air Force One Angel still is not identified, and the frozen George Washington has still not made a reappearance. So yeah, the story itself is only just heating up right now, making it a perfect time to hop in. That said, there is one issue that I want to bring up. I wasn't going to include it, but it's been driving me nuts trying to find a good explanation for it. So basically, Maya Arnoldson was abducted and turned into a Lincoln looker for 2 weeks. She was the wrong person, so they let her leave. The general consensus in the Monument Mythos fanbase is that after releasing her, they felt she knew too much and had to kill her through the statue. However, the timeline simply doesn't add up. After being released, Maya received an apology directly from Reagan, who we can assume is the current president. However, the footage released by Melrose documenting the statue's path was during the Dean administration. This is further confirmed when Dean himself is asked about it. So Maya had to have died during the Dean administration, but then can't be alive during the Reagan era for her to be a Lincoln looker. Maybe I'm not looking at this from the correct angle or something. If anyone has any ideas, let me know. And that's about all I got for this series. I mean, I call it a series, but really you could watch each video as its own standalone film, and it still works. My favorites include Rockefeller Revelation, which is a film documenting a president coming to terms with the war crimes he participated in. Freedom Faller is a tragic tale of a statue brought to life. Rockefeller Tree Tragedy is expertly told from 2 different perspectives merged into one compelling story. And Suez Canal Crab is immersed with criticisms of a super-materialistic society that intentionally or not values luxury items over human life. It's also one of the most darkly humorous videos of the series. So yeah, I highly recommend this series. It's so unique compared to other analog horror I've tried to get into. It's been awesome seeing this channel grow as I've made this video, and he deserves all of it and more. I'm excited to see where this all goes. And hopefully, you all join the ride with me. Hey everybody, Zelcher here. I'm gonna make this quick since I have a lot on my plate right now, and this video is already long enough. This is a new type of media I'm covering, so hopefully you all liked it. This series is super underrated, although it's picking up quite a lot of steam recently, so that's cool to see. Thank you to all my patrons, I love all your support. Special thanks to Little Shy Fry, as always, you're a real one. And yeah, hope to see you all next time.